What happens when the world's most unlikely twins become Hollywood's most profitable gamble? While audiences laughed at Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito's mismatched brotherhood, the real story behind Twins involves secret casting alternatives with Hulk Hogan, a future A-lister's uncredited debut, scientific inaccuracies that created plot holes, and a financial deal so risky it became Schwarzenegger's biggest career payday, earning him more than all his Terminator films combined. Fact 1. Schwarzenegger's biggest payday gamble. Arnold Schwarzenegger made more money from Twins than he did from any of his legendary Terminator movies, and it all came down to one incredibly risky financial decision that nobody thought would pay off. When Universal Pictures approached Schwarzenegger about starring in this comedy, they were genuinely nervous about the whole project because it was such a departure from his usual action hero roles. The studio executives saw Schwarzenegger as their reliable action star who could guarantee big box office returns with movies like Predator and The Terminator, so asking him to do a buddy comedy felt like a massive gamble that could potentially damage both his career and their investment. Because Universal viewed the comedy as such a risky venture compared to having Schwarzenegger make another profitable action film, they offered him his usual multi-million-dollar salary to star in Twins. However, Schwarzenegger made a decision that seemed completely crazy at the time, but would become one of the smartest financial moves of his entire career. Instead of taking his guaranteed paycheck, he voluntarily turned down his salary entirely and negotiated to take a share of the film's profits instead. Danny DeVito and director Ivan Reitman made similar deals, with all three of them collectively taking 40% of the film's back-end profits. The movie was made for just $18 million, which was considered a relatively modest budget, even back in 1988. When Twins became a surprise blockbuster hit, earning over $216 million worldwide, that 40% profit-sharing deal suddenly became worth an enormous amount of money. Schwarzenegger has revealed in multiple interviews that he earned over $40 million from Twins, which was significantly more than what he made from any single Terminator film. In a 2016 interview, he called the decision to invest in myself by trying comedy and foregoing his salary one of the best decisions of his entire life, and he told Andy Cohen in 2025 that Twins made him the most money of any film in his career. Fact 2. Hulk Hogan almost starred instead. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito were actually given a choice between two completely different movie projects, and if they had made the opposite decision, we would have gotten a very different version of Twins starring wrestling superstar Hulk Hogan and Back to the Future's Christopher Lloyd as the unlikely twin brothers. This fascinating casting alternate reality has been confirmed by all three actors involved, including Schwarzenegger, DeVito, and Hogan himself, who have all discussed this scenario in various interviews over the years. The situation unfolded when both Twins and Suburban Commando were being developed around the same time in the late 1980s, and the studios apparently had overlapping talent considerations for these two comedy projects. Schwarzenegger and DeVito were presented with both scripts and given the opportunity to choose which film they wanted to make together. Meanwhile, Hulk Hogan, who was at the peak of his wrestling fame and looking to transition into Hollywood movies, was being considered for the lead role in whichever project Schwarzenegger and DeVito ultimately passed on. When Schwarzenegger and DeVito decided to go with Twins, it left Suburban Commando available for Hogan, but the casting would have been completely different if the choices had been reversed. According to the actors involved, if Schwarzenegger and DeVito had chosen Suburban Commando instead, then Hulk Hogan and Christopher Lloyd would have been cast as the genetically engineered twin brothers in Twins. This would have created an entirely different dynamic, with Hogan's massive wrestling persona and Lloyd's quirky comedic energy replacing the specific chemistry that Schwarzenegger and DeVito brought to their roles. Suburban Commando did eventually get made in 1991 with Hogan in the lead role, but it featured Christopher Lloyd in a supporting role rather than as Hogan's co-star twin. The film was about an alien warrior who crash lands on Earth, which was quite different from the genetic experiment premise of twins, making it interesting to imagine how the twin brother concept would have worked with Hogan and Lloyd's completely different physical appearances and acting styles. Fact 3. Steve Martin was originally Vincent. The original screenplay for Twins was actually written with Steve Martin in mind to play the role of Vincent Benedict, the streetwise conman twin that eventually went to Danny DeVito, and this casting change completely transformed the entire dynamic and tone of the movie. The screenwriters William Davies and Will Davies spent several months developing the first draft of the script, specifically for the pairing of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Steve Martin, envisioning a comedy that would capitalize on the contrast between Schwarzenegger's imposing physical presence and Martin's signature wild and crazy guy persona from his stand-up comedy and Saturday Night Live days. Davies has explained in interviews that they were genuinely excited about writing for this particular actor combination because Schwarzenegger and Martin represented such different comedy styles and physical types. The writers saw Martin's characters as having a sort of playful malevolence and devious quality that would create an interesting dynamic with Schwarzenegger's character, who was conceived as very innocent and pure as the driven snow. They felt that Martin's more Machiavellian and scheming comedic approach would provide a perfect contrast to the naive and well-meaning Julius Benedict that Schwarzenegger would portray. After the screenwriters completed their first draft and sent it to director Ivan Reitman around the holidays, they received feedback that included one major note that would change the entire project. Reitman told them that Vincent had to be played by Danny DeVito instead of Steve Martin. This decision wasn't based on any problems with the script or Martin's potential performance, but rather on Reitman's vision for what the movie could become, with DeVito's completely different energy and physical presence in the role. The switch from Martin to DeVito required the writers to rework significant portions of the screenplay because DeVito brought a very different comedic sensibility to the character. While Martin's comedy often relied on his manic energy and elaborate physical comedy, DeVito's approach was more grounded in his streetwise, fast-talking persona that audiences knew from his work in films like Ruthless People and his television role on Taxi, creating a completely different type of twin brother dynamic with Schwarzenegger. Fact 4. Heather Graham's secret movie debut. Future Boogie Nights star Heather Graham had one of her very first film roles in Twins, playing the young version of Marianne Benedict in flashback scenes, but her appearance was completely uncredited and went unnoticed by most audiences, who had no idea they were watching a future Hollywood star. At the time of filming in 1988, Graham was just 18 years old and essentially unknown in the entertainment industry, working as a struggling young actress trying to break into Hollywood after moving to Los Angeles to pursue her acting dreams. Graham's role in Twins involved appearing in the opening scenes of the movie that showed the backstory of the genetic experiment that created the twin brothers Julius and Vincent. She portrayed the young version of Marianne Benedict, the woman who was selected to be the mother of the genetically engineered children, during the flashback sequences that explained how the twins came to be born in 1953. These scenes were crucial for establishing the scientific premise of the entire movie, showing how Marianne participated in the secret government experiment that combined DNA from 6 different fathers to create what was supposed to be the perfect child. What makes this casting even more interesting is that 1988 was actually a breakthrough year for Graham, as she landed her first major starring role in the teen comedy License, to drive alongside Corey Haim and Corey Feldman. However, her parents had forbidden her from accepting what could have been an even bigger role in the dark comedy Heathers that same year, because they felt the script was too inappropriate with its expletive-rich content. The uncredited cameo in Twins represented one of Graham's earliest professional acting jobs, serving as a stepping stone in her career before she would go on to gain recognition in films like Drugstore Cowboy in 1989, and eventually achieve major stardom with her memorable role as Roller Girl in Paul Thomas Anderson's acclaimed Boogie Nights nearly a decade later. Her brief appearance in Twins remained largely unknown to audiences, until years later when film historians and trivia enthusiasts began identifying early career appearances of actors who later became famous. Fact 5. Director's kids, hidden in plain sight. Director Ivan Reitman included his own real children, Jason and Catherine Reitman, as extras in one of the most important scenes in Twins, but they were hidden in plain sight as regular background characters that most viewers never realized were the filmmaker's actual kids. This family cameo occurs during the pivotal scene where Julius Benedict visits the house of Granger, one of his 6 biological fathers, as part of his quest to learn more about his origins and find clues about his missing twin brother Vincent. In this sequence, Julius arrives at Granger's comfortable suburban home and is welcomed inside to meet with the man who contributed his DNA to the genetic experiment that created the twins. While Julius and Granger have their conversation about the past, there are children playing in the background who appear to be Granger's grandchildren, creating a warm family atmosphere that contrasts with Julius's own lack of family connections. Jason Reitman appears as the boy who is casually playing basketball in the driveway or yard area, while Catherine Reitman plays the girl who notices and reacts when Julius shows Granger a photograph during their discussion. What makes this casting choice particularly meaningful is that Jason Reitman would eventually follow in his father's footsteps to become a successful filmmaker in his own right, directing acclaimed movies like Juno, Up in the Air, and Ghostbusters Afterlife decades later. At the time of filming Twins in 1988, however, he was just a young boy appearing in his dad's movie alongside his sister Catherine, who would also pursue a career in entertainment and become known for her work as an actress and producer on shows like Workin' Moms. The scene serves an important narrative purpose because it shows Julius learning more about his background from one of his genetic fathers, but the inclusion of Reitman's children adds a subtle layer of authentic family dynamics to the moment. This type of director cameo with family members was a common practice in Hollywood, allowing filmmakers to include their loved ones in their projects while also saving money on casting child actors for small background roles that required reliable and cooperative young performers. Fact 6. The scientific plot makes no sense. The entire premise of Twins is based on a fundamental scientific error that creates a major plot hole when Dr. Traven explains to Julius and Vincent how they came to exist as twin brothers from the same genetic experiment. During the crucial scene where the twins finally learn the truth about their origins, Dr. Traven tells them that the embryo split to create both of them, but this explanation is completely wrong according to basic biology, and actually contradicts the entire story that the movie is trying to tell. The scientific problem is that embryos simply do not split to create twins, which means the movie's explanation for how Julius and Vincent were born doesn't match real biological processes. In actual human reproduction, it's the zygote, which is the fertilized egg cell, that splits during the very early stages of development to create identical twins. An embryo is a much later stage of development that occurs after the zygote has already begun dividing and growing. So by the time something becomes an embryo, it's far too late in the process for splitting to occur in the way the movie describes. Even more problematic for the movie's plot is the fact that if a zygote actually had split to create Julius and Vincent, they would have been identical twins with exactly the same genetic makeup, physical appearance, and characteristics. The whole point of Twins as a comedy is that Julius and Vincent are drastically different from each other in every possible way, with Julius getting all the good genetic traits like intelligence, strength, and good looks, while Vincent supposedly got all the leftover undesirable characteristics. This physical and personality contrast between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito is what makes the movie funny and drives the entire story. The correct scientific explanation for how Julius and Vincent could exist as fraternal twins would involve two separate eggs being fertilized by different sperm at the same time, which would allow for the dramatic differences in their physical appearance and abilities that the movie depends on for its comedy. The genetic experiment could have involved multiple fertilized eggs developing simultaneously, with one receiving the beneficial genetic material and the other getting less desirable traits, but the movie's explanation of embryo splitting completely undermines this possibility and creates a logical inconsistency that sharp-eyed viewers have noticed over the years. Fact 7. Marshall Bell's recycled silver briefcase. The same actor who plays the main villain Webster in Twins also appeared in Arnold Schwarzenegger's science fiction blockbuster Total Recall just 2 years later, and amazingly, both movies feature the exact same silver briefcase as an important prop, creating an unusual connection between these two completely different films. Marshall Bell portrays Webster, the ruthless hitman who pursues Julius and Vincent throughout the movie because he wants to get his hands on the valuable prototype fuel injector that Vincent accidentally stole, and the briefcase containing millions of dollars becomes a central plot device in the film's climactic scenes. In Twins, Webster is obsessed with obtaining the silver briefcase that contains the money from the illegal sale of the stolen prototype, and this briefcase plays a crucial role in the final confrontation between the villain and the twin brothers. The sleek metallic case represents both the danger that Webster poses to Julius and Vincent and the criminal world that Vincent has been trying to escape throughout the movie. When Webster finally gets his hands on the briefcase, it sets up the dramatic finale where the twins must work together to defeat him and recover the money. What makes this prop connection so fascinating is that Marshall Bell went on to play George, also known as Kuato, the mutant rebel leader in Total Recall, which was released in 1990. In that science fiction epic, Arnold Schwarzenegger's character Douglas Quaid carries a very similar silver briefcase that contains important items he needs to evade the bad guys and complete his mission on Mars. Film enthusiasts and prop collectors have identified that this is actually the same physical briefcase used in both productions, making it a rare example of a specific prop being recycled between two major Hollywood movies starring the same lead actor. This type of prop reuse was fairly common in the film industry as a cost-saving measure, especially when studios had expensive or distinctive items that could serve similar narrative purposes in different movies. The silver briefcase worked perfectly in both films as a symbol of valuable contents that the protagonists needed to protect from villains, and having Marshall Bell appear in both movies with connections to the same prop creates an interesting bit of trivia for fans who pay close attention to background details and supporting actors across different films. Fact 8. Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa's offensive credit. The accomplished actor Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa, who would later become famous for playing villains in movies like Mortal Kombat and Pearl Harbor, appears in the opening scenes of Twins as Julius's martial arts instructor on the tropical island. But when the end credits roll, he's listed simply as Oriental Man, which reflects the outdated and problematic terminology that was unfortunately still being used in Hollywood during the late 1980s. This credit is particularly striking because Tagawa was already an established actor with a name that could have easily been included in the credits, but instead the filmmakers chose to use a generic racial descriptor that would be considered completely inappropriate by today's standards. Tagawa's role in the movie shows him training Julius in martial arts as part of his comprehensive education on the island, demonstrating the physical skills that make Julius such a formidable character despite his innocent and naive personality. The scene establishes that Julius has been trained not just intellectually, but also physically, which becomes important later in the movie when he uses his martial arts abilities to protect Vincent and fight off various threats. Tagawa brings a serious and professional presence to these training sequences, helping to establish the disciplined environment in which Julius was raised. The use of Oriental Man in the credits serves as a time capsule of how Asian actors were often treated in Hollywood productions during this era, when their individual identities and professional accomplishments were frequently overlooked in favor of generic racial categorizations. This type of crediting was unfortunately common in films from the 1980s and earlier, reflecting broader industry attitudes that failed to recognize Asian performers as full participants in the creative process deserving of proper acknowledgement. Tagawa himself would go on to have a distinguished career playing complex characters in major films, often portraying memorable villains with depth and nuance that went far beyond the stereotypical roles that many Asian actors were limited to during this period. His later success in films like Mortal Kombat, where he played the iconic Shang Tsung, demonstrated his range and talent as a performer, making the generic credit in Twins seem even more inappropriate and dismissive of his professional capabilities and cultural identity. Fact 9. Kelly Preston's future famous marriage. Kelly Preston, who plays Marnie Mason, the sweet and patient girlfriend who falls in love with Arnold Schwarzenegger's character Julius in Twins, would go on to marry one of Hollywood's biggest stars just 3 years later and become part of one of the entertainment industry's most famous couples. At the time of filming Twins in 1988, Preston was a rising young actress who had appeared in films like Mischief and Space Camp, but she was still establishing herself in Hollywood and had no idea that her future would become intertwined with John Travolta, the legendary star of Saturday Night Fever, Grease, and Pulp Fiction. Preston met Travolta in 1987 while they were both working on the comedy film The Experts, which was actually filmed before Twins but released after it due to distribution delays. Their romance developed over the next few years, and they married in 1991 in a ceremony that took place in Paris, followed by a second ceremony in Florida to ensure the marriage was legally recognized. This relationship would become one of Hollywood's most enduring partnerships, lasting until Preston's death from breast cancer in 2020. Throughout their marriage, Preston and Travolta collaborated on several film projects, including the critically panned science fiction movie Battlefield Earth in 2000, where Preston played the girlfriend of Travolta's villainous character Turl. She also appeared alongside her husband in the biographical crime drama Gotti in 2018, where Travolta played the infamous mob boss John Gotti, and Preston portrayed his wife Victoria. These collaborations allowed audiences to see the real-life chemistry between the married couple translated onto the screen in their fictional roles. Fact 10. The movie title was stolen. The Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito comedy was originally going to be called The Twins Project, because the simple title Twins was already being used by acclaimed director David Cronenberg for his own completely different film about twin brothers. But in an act of professional courtesy between filmmakers, Cronenberg graciously agreed to give up the title and rename his movie, allowing the comedy to use the more straightforward and marketable name. This title conflict arose during the pre-production phase in early 1988, when both films were being developed simultaneously by different studios, creating a situation where two major Hollywood productions were competing for the same basic title. Cronenberg's film was a dark psychological thriller, starring Jeremy Irons in dual roles as twin gynecologists who become increasingly disturbed and dangerous as their lives spiral out of control. This serious and deeply unsettling drama could not have been more different from the lighthearted buddy comedy that Ivan Reitman was making with Schwarzenegger and DeVito, but both movies centered around the concept of twin brothers, making the title Twins equally appropriate for either project from a marketing perspective. The situation was resolved through personal connections within the film industry, as Cronenberg and Reitman were reportedly friends who were able to work out the title conflict amicably without any legal disputes or studio interference. According to industry reports from the time, Cronenberg made the decision to rename his film as a favor to Reitman, recognizing that the comedy would likely benefit more from the simple and accessible title Twins than his own art house thriller would. Cronenberg ultimately retitled his movie Dead Ringers, which actually turned out to be a more appropriate and evocative name for his disturbing story about the psychological deterioration of the twin doctors. Dead Ringers was released in September of 1988 and received critical acclaim for Irons's dual performance and Cronenberg's direction, while Twins came out in December of the same year and became a major commercial success. Both films found their audiences despite dealing with completely different themes and tones, proving that the title change worked out well for both directors and allowed each movie to establish its own distinct identity in the marketplace. Fact 11. Vincent's cat named Julius Telepathy. The movie establishes the psychic connection between Julius and Vincent through cleverly hidden details that most viewers miss on their first viewing, including the remarkable coincidence that Vincent has named his pet cat Julius, while Julius has given his computer the name Vincent, even though the twin brothers have never met or communicated with each other in their entire 35 years of life. This naming coincidence serves as one of the most subtle pieces of evidence that the twins share some kind of supernatural bond that transcends their physical separation and different upbringings. Throughout the film, the screenwriters included several moments that demonstrate this twin telepathy without making it too obvious or turning it into a major plot device that would overshadow the comedy. The cat and computer naming is just one example of how Julius and Vincent unconsciously mirror each other's behavior and thoughts, despite being raised in completely different environments, with Julius growing up on a remote tropical island with scientists and Vincent surviving on the streets of Los Angeles as a small-time criminal. Other instances of their psychic connection include scenes where both twins simultaneously scratch the same part of their bodies at exactly the same time, suggesting that they can somehow feel what the other is experiencing, even when they're miles apart. The movie also shows Julius using this telepathic ability to track down Vincent when his brother abandons him and heads to Houston alone to complete the illegal sale of the stolen prototype fuel injector, with Julius somehow sensing Vincent's location and emotional state. The filmmakers were careful not to overplay the twin telepathy concept because they wanted to keep the focus on the comedy and the developing relationship between the brothers, rather than turning the movie into a supernatural thriller. The subtle details, like the matching names for their pets and possessions, work much better than more obvious demonstrations of psychic powers would have, allowing audiences to notice these connections on repeat viewings while maintaining the believability of the story. This approach helps ground the fantastic premise of the genetic experiment in emotional reality, suggesting that the bond between Julius and Vincent goes deeper than just their shared DNA and represents a genuine spiritual connection between the separated brothers. Fact 12. Fake plastic chain death scene. The climactic death of the villain Webster in Twins contains one of the most obvious prop failures in the entire movie, as the supposedly heavy metal chain that crushes him is clearly made of lightweight plastic that has been painted silver to look realistic, but the paint has worn off in several places to reveal the bright white plastic material underneath. This production mistake becomes glaringly obvious during the dramatic finale when Vincent drops the chain onto Webster to save Julius and end the threat that has been pursuing them throughout the film, but instead of looking like a deadly piece of industrial equipment, the chain appears fake and harmless. The scene takes place in the warehouse where Webster has cornered both twins and is threatening to kill them after obtaining the briefcase full of money from the illegal prototype sale. Vincent must use his street smarts and the environment around him to defeat the armed hitman, and he spots the heavy chain hanging overhead as his weapon of choice. The moment is meant to be both satisfying and somewhat darkly comedic, as the small-time crook Vincent finally gets the upper hand on the professional killer who has been terrorizing him and his brother. However, the visual effect is completely undermined by the obviously fake nature of the prop chain, which was likely made from lightweight plastic links for safety reasons during filming, but painted to appear metallic. The problem is that the silver paint has chipped and worn away in multiple spots, revealing the underlying white plastic material that makes it clear this is not a real metal chain at all. Sharp-eyed viewers can easily spot these paint chips and white plastic patches when the chain is falling, and after it lands on Webster. This type of prop failure was relatively common in 1980s movies, especially in action comedies where safety concerns required the use of lightweight fake materials for stunts involving actors, but the paint job was supposed to be durable enough to maintain the illusion throughout filming. The fact that the plastic chain's true nature is so visible in the final cut suggests that either the filmmakers didn't notice the problem during editing, or they decided that the scene worked well enough dramatically that audiences would overlook the obvious fake prop in favor of enjoying Vincent's victory over the villain. Fact 13. The Rambo poster Easter egg. Julius Benedict encounters a movie poster for Rambo during his first bewildering walk through the streets of Los Angeles, and in a moment that serves as a playful jab at the real-life rivalry between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, he stops to study the poster with obvious confusion before checking his own impressive bicep and scoffing dismissively at Stallone's muscular display. This brief scene works on multiple levels, showing Julius's complete innocence about popular culture and entertainment, while also allowing Schwarzenegger to take a subtle dig at his main competitor in the action hero market of the 1980s. The moment occurs as Julius wanders through the urban environment that is completely foreign to him after spending his entire life on a remote tropical island with no exposure to movies, television, or celebrity culture. Everything he sees is new and puzzling to him, from the crowds of people to the bright lights and advertisements. But the Rambo poster particularly catches his attention because it features a muscular man in a combat situation that might remind him of his own physical training and martial arts background. Julius's reaction to the poster is perfectly in character for someone who has no understanding of movies or movie stars, but has been trained to be physically superior in every way. When he examines the image of Stallone's character and then looks at his own significantly larger and more developed bicep, his dismissive expression suggests that he's comparing their physical capabilities and finding Stallone's muscles unimpressive by his own standards. The scoff that follows indicates that Julius, despite his naive personality, has enough confidence in his own physical abilities to recognize that he's in better shape than this supposed action hero. This Easter egg reflects the well-known professional rivalry between Schwarzenegger and Stallone during the height of their action movie careers in the 1980s, when both actors were competing to be the biggest and most successful muscle-bound action star in Hollywood. Their rivalry extended to comparing box office numbers, physical fitness, and even the size of their muscles, making Julius's dismissive reaction to the Rambo poster a perfect way for Schwarzenegger to get in a playful jab at his competitor, while staying completely in character as the innocent and physically superior Julius Benedict. Fact 14. Geography error in mother's location. The twins are given specific directions to find their biological mother, Mary Ann Benedict, at an artist colony that is supposedly located 200 miles north of Santa Fe, New Mexico. But this geographical information contains a major error that would actually place her in downtown Alamosa, Colorado, which is 36 miles too far north to be in New Mexico where the movie shows them finding her. This mistake reveals that the filmmakers either didn't consult an accurate map when writing the script, or simply didn't realize how far 200 miles would actually take Julius and Vincent from their starting point in Santa Fe. The geographical error occurs during the crucial scene where Dr. Traven finally provides Julius and Vincent with information about their mother's whereabouts after they confront him at his research facility in Los Alamos. Traven tells them that Marianne is living at an artist colony exactly 200 miles north of Santa Fe, which should give them precise directions to find the woman they've been searching for throughout their journey. This information comes at a pivotal moment in the story when the twins are finally close to reuniting with their mother and learning the complete truth about their origins and separation. However, anyone familiar with the geography of the American Southwest would immediately recognize that traveling 200 miles directly north from Santa Fe would take the twins well beyond the New Mexico state border and deep into southern Colorado. Santa Fe is located in north-central New Mexico, and a journey of that distance would cross the state line and end up in the town of Alamosa, which is a significant distance into Colorado, rather than at any location that could reasonably be described as being in New Mexico. The movie shows Julius and Vincent successfully finding their mother at the artist colony, which is clearly meant to be located in New Mexico based on the visual context, and the fact that they don't appear to cross any state borders during their travel. This suggests that the filmmakers intended for the colony to be somewhere in northern New Mexico, perhaps closer to the Colorado border, but the specific distance mentioned in the dialogue creates an impossible geographical situation that places their destination in an entirely different state than where the story actually takes them. Fact 15. Visible film crew staring at camera. Multiple scenes throughout Twins feature background actors and extras who break the fundamental rule of filmmaking by staring directly into the camera lens, creating awkward moments that pull viewers out of the story and remind them that they're watching a movie production rather than observing real events. These mistakes occur in several key sequences, most notably during the shopping montage where Julius and Vincent get matching white suits and walk through crowded city streets, with numerous people in the background looking straight at the camera, instead of acting naturally as pedestrians who would be unaware of being filmed. The most obvious example happens during the scene where Julius physically confronts and beats up Morris Klain, one of the loan shark brothers who has been threatening Vincent over his unpaid debts, after Julius demonstrates his superior fighting skills and sends the thug running. There are two extras clearly visible in the background, who spend the entire remainder of the scene staring directly at the camera with obvious fascination, apparently more interested in watching the film crew work than maintaining the illusion that they're just random people going about their daily business on a city street. These camera-aware moments also occur during other crowd scenes throughout the movie, including instances where Julius and Vincent are walking through busy areas of Los Angeles, and the background actors seem to be gawking at Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito, rather than staying in character as regular citizens who wouldn't recognize or pay special attention to these particular individuals. The problem becomes especially distracting because the extras are looking directly at the camera equipment and film crew rather than at the actors themselves, making it clear that they're reacting to the production process rather than the characters in the story. This type of filming mistake was relatively common in movies from the 1980s, when crowd control and background actor direction were less sophisticated than they would become in later decades, with more experienced assistant directors and better training for extras. The errors suggest that the film's crew either didn't notice these problems during shooting, didn't have time to reshoot the affected scenes, or decided that the performances by Schwarzenegger and DeVito were strong enough that audiences would overlook the obvious background distractions in favor of enjoying the main story and comedy between the twin brothers.